Well, I guess firstly, can you tell us what your experiences have been on the Wall Street occupation?
Um, well, I first began to be involved with it back in August at the planning meetings. And a few months before this, we'd actually done an encampment across from City Hall to protest cuts to the city's budget, to social services, schools, and so on. And so that actually kind of was fed into Occupy Wall Street. Like we learned a lot about encampments and stuff like that. And so we, we were involved in the organizing and have basically been there the whole time. And the whole thing, I mean, it's just been absolutely unbelievable. I mean, it's like, it's a completely inspiring and amazing experience. It's beyond anything that I mean, it is basically my wildest dreams a year ago. I wouldn't, I would not have predicted that this would have happened so quickly and with so much potential. I mean, we hoped for something like this, but it's really quite amazing that it's actually happening.
And do you want to tell us some of the some of the social conditions that have led to this? Like, I mean, we're hearing
Well,
stories.
yeah, yeah. I mean, the social conditions that have led to this are, part of the global economic crisis and are very similar to what's happening in many other countries. The cuts to basic social services, foreclosures. I mean, but the unemployment rate really is the probably single most important thing driving this. I mean, the real unemployment rate is something like 16 to 18%, and for people, in their 20s, it's like 40%. Where that's not exact, but I mean, it's up there. I mean, there's students are graduating from college with huge amounts of debt, and there's no jobs for them. People are laid off; they can't find work, and it's much worse in Black and Hispanic it is for the U.S. as a whole. So there's just acute misery. I mean, the healthcare is becoming increasingly rare. More and more people are working without healthcare. All the people who lost their homes, as a result of the predatory lending. It's just an unending litany of problems that are, I mean, the economic crisis is global and it's operating very similarly everywhere. Yeah.
And it's hard to tell if you cut off then or not. One question that we're wondering here is like what happens at the occupation itself. Like, is there a daily routine or is it different every day? Like, I understand there are sometimes marches and connections with unions, but is there in the decision making process? Can you explain what it's like day to day on the occupation?
Well, the occupation, I mean, there have been a lot of reports in the media that have described Occupy Wall Street as being disorganized. The actual reality on the ground is that it is incredibly organized. There are at this point probably 100 working groups, and maybe that might be 50 to 100 committees, working groups, and subcommittees. There are people doing, dozens of different, ongoing activities at the same time. When you have food, sanitation, there's a library, an information desk. There's what? Oh my God! I mean, there's huge numbers of things. I went to a meeting today at a public atrium on Wall Street, actually, that a lot of the occupation groups are using as meeting space because it's this big open public area with seating. And I went there for one particular meeting, but there were literally like 10 other groups meeting there, which each had between 15 to 30 people in them. And these were all organizing meetings of Occupy Wall Street. I mean, there were 300 people doing organizing in this room at the same time on a totally random weeknight. I mean, I was organizing protests 3 years ago where 300 people would have been considered good turnout for a protest, and there's now 300 people organizing, just in one place, and then that's not even just counting the people who are actually in the park, where there was a general assembly happening that had about 300 or 400 people present. Maybe more, actually. It might even have been more than that. So, I mean, the daily reality is that the place is just buzzing with activity. Every time you go down there, there's people are just constantly working on various different projects, and there's almost daily protests happening in the city that are being promoted. Everyone comes to Occupy Wall Street at this point. On the left in the city, it's this meeting ground. So other groups call protest. They either begin at Occupy Wall Street and march somewhere else, or march to Occupy Wall Street when they want to get people to go to things. So, for instance, this is of particular importance because it relates to the labor movement. There's one actual strike happening in New York City right now, and several strikes coming up on the horizon, which are going to be very, very important for Occupy Wall Street to report to. And I've been working with a group called the Labor Outreach Committee of Occupy Wall Street, and so we've been putting a lot of effort into getting labor rank and file involved, and supporting job actions that workers are doing. So right now, one thing that's happened, Sotheby's is an art auction house in the city that is having a dispute with its handlers. It's locked out the handlers who actually move the art and prepare, do all the behind the scenes work. And so we've been organizing people through Occupy Wall Street to go up and disrupt their auction. And people just stand up while they're having an auction, and start chanting something, or start explaining why they're there, and then that person would then get asked to leave, and then someone else comes up, and they just keep doing this for 45 minutes. So it's really hitting them where they hurt. This is their big auction season. So I mean that's not a huge number of workers involved. I mean, it's something like it's under 100, but it's getting a lot of support. And there are two other major struggles coming up. That one is the Verizon workers on the East Coast. About 45,000 of them were on strike against Verizon for about a week or two earlier in the summer. They went back to the table, but the company is not negotiating in good faith, and so they started rallying again. They're going to have a rally at Verizon headquarters on Friday and then march to Occupy Wall Street. And then there's also the Postal Service, which is laying off something like 100,000 workers. And so they've started having rallies, which have already linked up with Occupy Wall Street. So, and all of that is just what one committee is doing. That's what the Labor Committee is doing, which is obviously an extremely important one. I mean, labor, the labor movement and the working class are going to be are already and will continue to be the key drivers of this movement. The groups that really kind of give the most force and direction to it, I think. Which is not to say that there aren't other groups that are doing important stuff. I mean, Occupy Wall Street has become a total meeting point where the interconnection between all of the different forms of oppression and exploitation are made extremely clear through this movement, which is one of its strengths. And the labor movement, actually, I mean, the official labor movement has a lot to learn from this. And it's very interesting to watch the way that this, this very powerful and quite radical movement is interacting with the labor movement, because they're rubbing off on each other in mostly the right ways. I'll stop there.
Thanks for that. Just a couple more questions. We read last week that the mayor was planning to try and kick you all off and clean up the park, and that attempt, they had to back off on that. And one thing that we read was that there was pressure from elected officials to convince the mayor to back off. So just a question about that. Like, can you describe what happened there and what the I guess the level of support, and Also, one thing people are asking about, given that Democrats have now come out in support of it, how do you see that? Are there attempts to co-opt the movement? What does that mean?
Um, I'm sorry. So what was the first one again? Can you just repeat?
Sorry, just about the mayor trying to clean you.
Oh, right. So there were some behind the scenes calls from Democrats to the mayor, but that was probably. I mean, that may have had some role in him stopping, but probably more important ultimately was the fact that there were something like 5,000 people in the square at 6 in the morning. Many of them were workers, and actually the unions really got out the call. A number of the big municipal unions called on their members to attend, and a lot of them did. So that was very powerful. I mean, there were thousands of people there, including many of them workers. There was the union leaders also putting pressure on Bloomberg, and then there were some Democrats doing it as well. So it was, and that leads to the question of the Democrats trying to co-opt this, which has become a huge topic of debate. There are a number of debates happening on the listserv that some of the organizers use, which where there's a really fierce debate going on over the Democrats, and everyone is basically hostile to the Democrats, but there are a lot of people saying that we shouldn't go after them too harshly. We don't want to alienate Democratic supporters. And I mean, at this point, frankly, that's just too timid at this point. The Democrats have already alienated their own supporters, and what we need to be doing is to draw them into this movement. And there's also a lot of questions about liberal groups like Move On, which I don't know if you're familiar with that, but they're probably the largest grassroots or pseudo-grassroots liberal organization that kind of is on the left wing of the Democrats, but definitely within the Democratic Party, not in any way challenging them. And so both the Democrats and groups like Move On have been making statements where they sympathize with the movement and basically set themselves up as being allies of the movement. And this is a huge trap for the movement that it's really important to not fall into. Now, most of the people who are organizing Occupy Wall Street, as I said, they're fairly hostile to the Democrats, although some of them feel like we shouldn't be too negative about it. But I think the danger is not so much that Move On or the Democrats are going to take over Occupy Wall Street, which is impossible. I mean, they're just Occupy Wall Street is just far too dominated by the left. In fact, even the revolutionary left, not socialist mainly. It's mainly anarchist leaning, like the core organizers. But they're not. I mean, this is not a group that can be co-opted by Move On, and there's too many of them in Occupy Wall Street itself for it to actually be co-opted. The danger is that they may be able to co-opt the media coverage, and if they can seize control of the media narrative, then that would create a very complex and confusing situation where you would have a movement that is opposed to the Democratic Party being co-opted by a group that it definitely does not agree with, but because the movement puts so much focus on decentralization, and this is one of the weaknesses of that, it's so focused on decentralization that it makes it hard to coherently respond to groups trying to co-opt it. Because, I mean, how does a leaderless... Oh, I just lost you. Can you still hear me?
I can still hear you and fine. I've got an internet connection problem message, but I can see you and hear you still.
Yeah, but so anyway, I was basically done. It's going to be interesting to see how the movement responds to this. This is not going to go away. This is going to continue to be an issue for some time, and so this is going to be that's going to be a big decision for the movement. How does it respond to this? It's going to be really kind of definitive. It's not going to be the be-all and end-all, but it will have a big impact. The way this plays out will have a big impact on the development of the Occupy movement.
And just finally, if I can ask two more questions, and then I'll say thank you for your time. The first one, you mentioned obviously the left was involved, and there's anarchists and socialists and whatever else. Can you first say any comments about how the different people coming from different perspectives are working together? And secondly, as a socialist yourself, what do you say? What are your? Do you have any comments about the prospects for socialism, or what this reflects about prospects for the left in general?
Yeah, so it's been very non-sectarian, working with other revolutionary tendencies, including the anarchists. The most sectarianism actually happened at the very beginning, before the actual occupation began, during the organizing, when it was a much smaller group of people organizing it, and so there was that tendency in smaller groups to actually be more sectarian because there's not as much at stake. Once the movement became very big, everyone, first of all, it was clear really to all tendencies that what was happening was very good, and that it needed to be supported. And so, no one wanted to pick sectarian fights, because there was a general recognition among everyone that would just be very bad for the movement. And so, the major debate between the anarchists and others, mainly socialists, I guess, has been over demands. And the anarchists have a majority on this. It's the lack of demands is a bit problematic, but what we're seeing happen now is that groups, working groups within Occupy Wall Street and other groups that are sympathetic to it, are starting to release demands of their own that aren't in the name. They're not being issued in the name of the entire movement, but they are beginning to be put out and debated. And that's going to be, together with the question of how they respond to the Democrats, that's going to be another extremely important, issue for the movement. And in terms of the prospects for socialism, I mean, the response that we've gotten to talking with people in the occupation about socialism has been overwhelming. I mean, we sold out of our paper is a monthly paper now. We sold out of the entire month's orders in about 9 days, and we've now reordered, I think, multiple times. And we've met huge numbers of people who are interested in into joining discussion groups or checking out meetings and discussing Marxism and what Occupy Wall Street means, and what is socialism all about. And so and the response from people who have come to Occupy events, it's been phenomenal. I mean, most of them are totally new to politics, but they're instantly getting active, and a lot of the old questions that contacts would have asked are not an issue here. So, I mean, many conversations at Occupy Wall Street go very quickly to discussions of, what does a revolution look like? How do we achieve socialism? What's wrong with capitalism? I mean, the conversations are beginning at a much more advanced stage than than when we met people a year ago. So it's really had an immediate impact on consciousness that's created a very large audience for socialist ideas.